Crazy. Great.
Great.
I thought this would be a perfect time to start talking about you because you are so kind and you talk about everybody else.
Aw,
But you're the star. You're the star. So I thought just a few questions to kind of get out and, talk about. How's
sure.
that? For
Sounds
about
good.
an for about an hour.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. So first of all, I want to ask you about what is the favorite thing that you've ever done or written or thought about? Because we're talking about ideas.
Wow, that's really a powerful question. And my gosh. Um, well, I think it's all boils down to one thing. I just last night I received an email from Ma Yangbo, who's I guess one of the most prominent poets in China, by which I mean, China is not I mean, historically, of course, China is renowned for its, poetry in ancient times, but now we have sort of what Ma describes as kind of almost like a overly delicate, saccharine kind of sensibility. He says that that's really, really popular. And so, as an avant-garde poet, he is and a postmodernist. He is really looking to us, to particularly specifically to the American Renaissance and authors such as Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, of course, and Melville. And he was the translator of Moby Dick into Chinese, which it sold like 500,000 copies, which is incredible. I don't know if that was to Chinese people or internationally or what, but it's fascinating. And he wrote to me, he contributed to, he has become a contributor to several of my anthologies, including the Bauhaus Tribute Anthology, which we just put out. We just published yesterday. And he said that he, quote, admires the spirit of rebellion in my work. And that's something that other people have pointed out. The Bram Stoker award-winning author John Palisano also, talked about my book, The Flowers of Doom, in terms of its, echoing the sort of the beats, the and well, I think it's that spirit of rebellion which has gotten me into a lot of trouble, throughout my life because I've never conformed. And as a student, I was always kind of questioning authority, and that got me into trouble with authority, as one does. I remember this is kind of be a long-winded answer, but um, that I remember when I was a junior in high school, I would always carry around my copy of Les Illuminations by Arthur Rimbaud, and I would just find solace in that. I would find solace. I felt like books were my friends. Books were were kind of companions, and they wouldn't talk back. And so I think my relationship with books, with literature, is and the sort of, I guess you would call them transgressive voices. I think that's almost a misnomer because, you know, honestly, to be frank with you, I think that T.S. Eliot is one of the most transgressive voices in literature, and he was a conservative, and he aspired to be sort of like a British. I mean, he became a British citizen, and he became a Church of England member. He wanted to be, just the staid, whatever, you know, Eminence grise, but the Wasteland was truly radical. And I think that he was an early adopter of a cut-up method, I mean, if the Wasteland, if T.S. Eliot were working today, he would be like doing industrial music. So I think above all, my favorite things to think about are revolt. You know, there's this book by my that my friend J. Carl Bogart um, did the cover for, and I just want to show you. It's called Becoming Visible, and this was put out by City Lights Books in I think it was his Pocket Poet Series number 39, the City Lights Books in 1981, right? So that was um, pretty long ago, but when you're, I feel kind of ancient right now, even though I'm not really that old. I'm 58 years old. And it says several of these poems were first published in Antaeus' Arsenal Surrealist Subversion, the Surrealist Movement in the United States, and the City Lights Anthology, right? So, and it was included also in Surrealism in 1978, 100th anniversary of Hysteria. What's fascinating about La Mantilla is one of my biggest influences is that he read at the Gallery 6 um, uh, reading where, famously Allen Ginsberg first read Howl, and some of the other readers were, I don't know if Kerouac read, but Richard Brautigan was there, and I believe Michael McClure. Don't quote me on that. But J. Carl Bogart did the cover art, and it's called photomorph, right? So he innovated a whole new form of artwork, which was combines photography with sort of fine art. I mean, other forms of art. And I just think that my favorite thing to think about is how do we push the needle, because okay, we are given constraints of we're embodied, we have sex and gender and faculties and emotions and a and needs. First of all, we have like basic needs that we can't really transcend. But I've always been interested in the things that we can transcend, and I think that there's more potential for transcendence than not. And then, some yogis in India, for example, have figured out how to transcend even, sex or food or any, I mean, there's literally some yogis that just exist on air. And so, because of my background, my parents raised me in Vedanta, and so I've always been like from very, very early age, I was exposed to all these magnificent ideas from the East, and that kind of has inspired my entire journey as a human being, as and a creative person, and just a lover of life, a lover of nature and a lover of ideas. And so I don't know if that's really answers your question.
That's beautiful, beautifully put. Can you go into what you learned as a child in Vita from your parents? What did you learn? What kind of ideas were of interest to you that you might think other kids weren't thinking about and exposed to?
Well, I definitely know that the other kids when I weren't exposed to these ideas. See, my parents sent me to a private academy when I think it was between, say, um, maybe third grade and like eighth grade. So what would be middle school. And that was run by a guy named Thomas Parker. Thomas Parker was a sort of a very, very well-known kind of cutting edge progressive educator, and he was a veteran of World War II. He'd seen action, and he was just an amazing man. And so he was a member of our church, the Vedanta Society. What what he really extolled his values, and my parents taught me, and what I learned from, reading, books by Swami Vivekananda and the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and the Bhagavad Gita, the sacred, holy books of of Hinduism. We're not Hinduism exactly, but it's more um, Vedanta is sort of like the essence of the Upanishads, which are the main sacred texts of India. There's two kinds of Upanishads. They have two forms. There's both Upanishads that deal more with the ritual side, and then there's the Upanishads that are sort of like the philosophy. And then there's an epic, which is basically like the Hindu Odyssey or Iliad, whatever, the Mahabharata, and that contains, um, you know, in its core, it contains the Bhagavad Gita, which is a sacred text of spiritual instruction. What which was very famously quoted in by J. Robert Oppenheimer when he saw the atom bomb testing. Um, where was that?
New Mexico.
That was New Mexico, right? And that was also where Los Alamos, right? Where that was where William S. Burroughs went to boarding school, and he never quite got over the fact of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It really profoundly transformed his life. And okay, the main idea of Vedanta is extremely simple. And this is something that was an influence on people like, Robert, like Nelson Rockefeller, like, you know, Swami Vivekananda had an extraordinary impact on world culture, but specifically American culture, because he believes that America was the land of, you know, where his ideas would really sink in. And he was actually, amazingly enough, he's been Vivekananda's been referenced by everybody from like Obama to Trump, believe it or not. Of course, they always mangle his name. It's Vivekananda. It's not, Vivek Ananda, but back in his day, plenty of people managed to mangle that name, right? And so basic idea, the core idea is every I think I'm trying to quote Vivekananda verbatim, every soul is potentially divine. Um, and we can manifest this divinity, I'm paraphrasing, by controlling nature, internal and external. And so essentially the the idea is that we can realize we can realize God. We can realize what God is. And it's this extremely different um, concept than what is put forth, for example, by evangelics Christianity, which is actually very, very recent. I mean, it's only, it's no more than, say, 100 years old, which is, amazing, right? People don't realize that all of these ideas, such as, for instance, the final this nonsense, like the final battle of Armageddon or the apocalypse or whatever, these are all misunderstandings of the original, you know, Greek and well, primarily the original Greek. Apocalypsis, or is a Greek term for un unveiling or uncovering, right? So the revelation is that what? Um, we are God. I mean, and the American literary critic Harold Bloom, my father, Stephen M. Johnson, studied with Harold Bloom at Yale University when Bloom was only about 6 years older than he was at the time. And Bloom was a Gnostic. And I think that in weird sorts of ways that there's parallels between the Trump hegemony and Gnosticism, and also QAnon, and also what is required in order for us to see beyond the present moment is a kind of Gnosticism, and piercing to the core of what every eminent philosopher, every great thinker, every form of spiritual wisdom has said, and as Aldous Huxley put it in, the perennial philosophy, that we are God, and that doesn't mean that we have the right to trample on others. We don't have power over others. We're not, um, we're not God with the in the old sort of, Jehovah sense. What we are is kind of mirrors of a. It's sort of like, there's the poem Adonais by Shelley, right? Where he talks about um life is a dome of many colored glass that stains the white radiance of eternity, you know. Um and I think that Shelley was right. I also think that Shelley was right when he said something to the effect that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the universe. And we're not um I think the really interesting thing is that God is just as fractured and chaotic and complex and nuanced and simple and all these things as we are, because there's nothing outside of us. I mean, like in Vedanta, the real insight is that there's nothing outside of our consciousness, and consciousness permeates everything. So all beings reflect this light, which also means that there's no final answers. Like, you know, the Professor Gayatri Spivak of Columbia, she was the translator of uh, Jacques Derrida, right? Jacques Derrida's De la Grammatologie. I believe it was 1965 or 1966. And she was also a worshiper of Sri Sarada Devi, who was um, the spiritual consort and wife of Sri Ramakrishna, who was the kind of considered to be an avatar of God by millions of Hindus. And so and her, I believe it was her father, was a direct disciple of Sri Sarada Devi. And um, my guru, Swami Sheshananda Maharaj of the Portland, Oregon Vedanta Society, was a direct disciple of Sri Sarada Devi, and I ascribe a lot of everything that I have to him. I mean, to his radiance and good, manner, his beautiful friendship and his lightness, and his sense of everything's going to be all right, everything's going to be all right. Yeah, so everything's going to be all right.
So, someone I know named Loomis Mayer wrote a book on transcendence and consciousness, and a lot of
Yeah,
a lot of his words are nest words, and he talks about the whole idea of amness. So, if we're gonna, and I love what you're saying because you were
thank you.
getting into you, we're focusing on you.
Yeah.
So, what is your amness?
Oh, wow,
What,
Amnes.
what, what is your essence? What is
I
your
love
essence?
that. I love that. I'm
Yeah.
going to write a poem about
And by the
Amnes.
way, I want to make sure we're recording, correct? We're
We are
recording.
absolutely recording.
Good,
Yeah. Yeah,
good.
Amnes. Amnes. Wow. So if
Amness
somebody
or ethnos. Yeah.
my Amnes, like I love words, I love the sound of words. And I was if I were to take that as a prompt for a poem, I think I'll turn it into a poem as by way of answering, because it's sort of like phenomenology, right? I mean, it'd be like delimiting the word amness by way of, well, it makes me think of Husserl and Martin Heidegger, like amness. So and I think wasn't wasn't Heidegger kind of a big influence on Sartre, or was it the other way around?
I don't know. We can look
Okay.
it up. I do
Okay.
not.
Yeah. But what Sartre said, was that, existence precedes essence. And what he meant was that we come into this world, and this is something that Heidegger talks about in being in time, is that we're thrown into the world. We're in a state of what Heidegger called das Sein, which means sort of the being. He created a lot of neologisms to sort of delimit his understanding of what the subject was, which is consciousness, but also being. And it's really, really hard to talk about being without, or isness without resorting to tautologies, to which a tautology, for people who don't know what that is. It's a sort of, it's a, it's a syllogism that cannot be contradicted, like a pen is a pen. And I think that for a lot of philosophy, is sort of spade work. You're getting into, like, just basically, before you can say anything, before you can say, I believe in, you know, whatever, you know what I mean? First of all, you have to sort of excavate, right? What are we talking about? What do we mean when we say, I mean, Heidegger got into things like, in the beginning of, you know, introduction, this is, I believe, an introduction to metaphysics, where he says, why are there essence? Why is there anything rather than nothing, right? And so what's the amness of me, well, the amness of me is the amness of everything. The amness of me is, I exist. I am a conduit of consciousness. I reflect consciousness through my own individual, it's refracted through my personal history, through my genetic history, through my environment, through my particular sensibilities. Now respond to things like neurodivergency, and being um, doubly exceptional, which means that I'm incredibly good at some things, and I'm like scarily incompetent at other things. So yeah, so the amness of me is basically trying to just exist and not superimpose anything on that.
You seem, I mean, yes, you're doubly exceptional at most things. I mean, I'm sure. But the thing that's so cool about you as well is that you accept things. And I'd love to talk about, I mean, you don't want to get into neurodivergence, but
Well,
it
I
is a
I kind
part
of
of,
do.
I think we should, because this is about you. This
Okay,
is about you.
okay,
Okay.
yeah,
So can you talk a little bit about how I guess a lot of things come down to process. How
yes.
do you process the day? How do you process the world? How do you do
Wow,
your,
very,
how do
very
you do your
differently,
thing?
very differently than most people, but it's something that I share with people who are good friends that I've come to know and value and trust, and are part of my inner circle, really. Um, Whether or not we're constantly in contact, is another thing. What I have in common with, Carrie Lee Chrome, with Lyric Rivera, who's known as Neurodivergent Rebel, with Carmela Voyes, who's an author. She's a dark fiction author in Scotland, who refers to herself as my support animal, and that is not in any way, it's not sort of like a masochistic thing. I mean, it's really, she's autistic, mildly autistic, I would say, to quote her. And Ellen maybe, I think, is also neurodivergent, um, and doubly exceptional. Um, it's a beautiful thing, but it's maddening to norms, to normies, because, and I've had many, many, many conversations with Ellen about this. We receive information in a sort of like a this complete injection, almost like an injection of total. I mean, we upload information that makes other people think that we're either insane or too smart for them, and that they get nervous. And I had this one woman who was kind of obsessed with me in a creepy way. You know, um she always had to drink vodka when she wanted to talk to me on Facebook, and I'd be like, don't do that to yourself. Why do you that to yourself? It's sort of like having a lot of alcohol is like giving yourself a concussion, right? You don't want to do that unless you want to, have some drinks, but then, enjoy it, right? And so neurodivergency is something that I've grown to love about myself because it is a way of processing the world that is deeply beautiful. And people like, well, we think of who's that, the woman who was the doctor who worked with cattle. Um,
Oh, Grandin,
yeah, Temple Grandin
Humble Grandin.
is a beautiful woman, and I think um, lovely, very, very, very strong, very, very creative and independent. Um, and it's kind of like having the emotional capacity that you had as a child, but you never outgrow it, and having enthusiasm for things. And I think this is something I also like. I've gotten to know, you know, um, Oceana Teppenhart, is one of our contributors to my anthologies, and also we're just becoming really, really good friends. She's said immediately that we're like two peas in a pod, and um, for those who are watching this film, I mean, she's they is a non-binary transgender person who um, um, is all about um, the justice, and really trying to. I think we're all trying to understand and analyze and process and come up with some sort of cogent, actionable response to the madness on the political scene. So neurodivergents, I think, are leading the way boldly, is because one of the interesting things that I've discovered about neurodivergency is that I do things that that nobody else would think of, because it never occurred to me not to, right? For example, challenging my doctors, or like who um this Kaiser neuropsychologist, Dr. Kimberly Lanny. Yeah, I'll say her name. She misdiagnosed me to the point of she alleged that I had sort of a dependent personality disorder, and that I
What
had.
what age? What age was that, by
No,
the way?
this was like in 2019. So this was recently because I have a neurodegenerative condition. And so I was trying to get help through Kaiser, and her misdiagnosis led to a cascade of misdiagnoses, to the point that the entire institution of Kaiser, kind of everybody signed off on this idea that some sort of hysteria or something. What do they call it? A conversion disorder, or it's something not true. And that's towards getting answers, that I got in contact through Twitter with a guy named David Tuller, who's the as a professor of public health at UC Berkeley. He's also and one of the few analysts in the world of conversion disorder. I forget what they call it, but it's called something else. It's basically Freud's idea, and it goes back to um, Hippocrates, really. So it's to like the 5th century BC. This idea um, that my genuine brain trauma was actually caused by some sort of conversion of subconscious conversion of psychological trauma into physical manifestations, which is not at all what happened. And I think it's a con. I think it's a con. It's a money-making scheme. So what I discovered, and this is I wrote this up and I analyzed this because for this article that I did for academia.edu, is that it was all about making money. So, and like I really want to make a documentary about this sick system. I mean, I know that Michael Moore made a documentary about this. Okay. Um, I don't know how much you want to get into this, but this is kind of
I'd like to, right. I'd like to know what you th what was going on for you and what you think it is. And you were misdiagnosed. I wouldn't put that person's name in, by the way, but what is it that happened? Because obviously you've been exceptional your entire life.
okay. So we're going to talk about neurodivergency and what specifically I'm self-diagnosed as having dyscalculia. Okay, so dyscalculia affects everything from your spatial relations, your body awareness of where your body is in space, right? Time, money, even specific things like being able to read an analog clock. And it's not that I can't do this, but it is extremely difficult and frustrating. And then people get upset with me and sort of, you know, people have been extremely mean to me my entire life because of this, and because I liken it to having factory standard equipment, right? And not having factory standard equipment. When you don't have factory standard equipment, stupid people look at you like you're stupid. And I've been bullied my entire life. I mean, up to now, like I have adult bullies. I have several people, I have even people who are, part of this gang of idiots who are, post murder threat videos against me and, say that I'm somehow making things up. I discovered so there's two different things, right? There's my being born with dyscalculia, which is a it's a it's a brain malfunction where it's actually different kind of wiring, right? I think it affects the temporal lobes and the parietal lobes. Don't quote me on that. But so that means that in addition to having brain trauma from an unknown disease, which causes me incredible pain and suffering every moment of my life, is that I also have this kind of extremely weird way of processing information. So I get everything all at once. And then, so to other people who are more linear, it looks like I'm out of it. But I'm sort of like, I'm sitting there going, yeah, I got it. So what's next, right? And it's like they're trying to explain something that's like, I'm way, way around the bend. And I'm like, okay, so catch up with me, right? Catch up with me. And I find it infuriating. You know, I mean, I don't mean like well-meaning, well-intentioned people who are just trying to have a conversation with me, right? But I mean people who treat me like I'm an idiot because they don't understand what I'm doing. And this was, I would say, a really good example of that is my novel Jason X Death Moon, which was like I was commissioned by New Line Cinema in 2005 to write this official adaptation of the movie Jason X, which was the 10th movie in the Friday the 13th, sort of slasher film series. It's a very famous slasher film series with this guy named Jason Voorhees, who's a sort of a malformed hydrocephalic um, dude who who puts on a hockey mask and starts killing people because his mother was killed and a lot of and he's drowned but he's revived, and then every movie they found inventive ways to kill him, and then he goes around inventively killing people. And I was given this assignment, and so I thought, well, okay, I'm I'm exhausted by this character already. And so my idea was, well, I was inspired by Pat Cadigan. Pat Cadigan wrote the original novelization of Jason X, right? And she came up with this hilarious concepts like there being an entire planet that is devoted to, like the Jason archives or whatever. She didn't at all take it seriously. And because it was a work for hire, um and her dizzyingly wonderful sense of humor and irreverence like infected me to the point that I I I just expanded from where she went. In the original movie, if people actually see it and not just through fan eyes, because it's hilarious dark satire, it's a very, very grim portrayal of the world of the future of the 25th century, where we've exhausted all of our resources, and we've turned the earth into a kind of a smoking crater, and it's unlivable. And so they had to take, the remnants of humanity and in a giant space arc and go to another, you know, world, which is known as Earth 2, which somehow managed to be exactly the same as Earth 1. And I took it really seriously because I didn't have any idea that I would have any like future as a writer. I'd wanted to publish a novel since I can remember. And so I wrote an actual novel. I mean, I took all of these, everything that I'd ever learned about writing, and I poured it into this mold, which really didn't fit. And it sort of cracked the mold, right? And people hated this book because I did all this extrapolation, you know, getting into concepts like quantum computing, which were really new, nanotechnology, which are really new, like data swarms or computer swarms, AI stuff, cybernetics, um, neural digital interface, which is something that I borrowed from, then Poppy Z. Bright, now Billy Martin, my good friend since the 90s, And so people hated that and still hate this book, because I took it seriously and I was like, well, William S. Burroughs, right? William S. Burroughs. I mean, David Cronenberg literally appears in the movie, and it's a little nod to the fact that Jason X is really kind of it's cyberpunk. It's directly in the mold of cyberpunk, meaning it's John Shirley, it's William Gibson, it's Rudy Rucker, it's all those people, and Pat Cadigan. You know, they deliberately, of course, they chose Pat Cadigan to write the novelization because she is, one of the founders of cyberpunk, right? And so I think a lot of this is directly to your question because a lot of people, I think normal people, whatever neurotypical people, would take that assignment and go, well, what is literally this story? You know, it's a very boring and stupid story about some, intellectually challenged person who drowns or apparently drowns in this accident, you know, in a swimming accident in a lake in 1958 at Camp Crystal Lake, which is just it's a sort of a generic slasher film, and it was the first slasher film. Well, actually, it was inspired by these Italian movies called by Mario Bava, particularly called Twitch of the Death Nerve. It was 1972, and this was it was directed by Sean Cunningham, who was a soft porn director at the time. And it went on, they didn't think at all, the original 1980 Friday the 13th, nobody thought that it would have legs. But this character, they were only going to make one movie, right? The Jason Voorhees was such a popular character that they made a second one, which was even more inspired by the Bava, Mario Bava. Have you ever seen Black Sunday
No,
with
no.
Barbara Steele? Oh my God, it's a masterpiece, because Bava was a painter as well, and the Italian tradition. I was just thinking recently about, have you ever seen the movie about that the painter? I sent you an email about this. The painter um, Gentileschi. Her last name was Gentileschi. She was the daughter of the Artemisia, right?
Yeah.
Artemisia. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful. Um, and I actually did a portrait of the actress in that film. It's in the back of the Valentina Sedley, right? This gorgeous. I think she was like 19 years old at the time. And it's an absolutely gorgeous movie. So, so I think I just sort of demonstrated what a neurodivergent person does when you ask them a simple question. And it's like, this is why I was never too successful at normal jobs.
You are brilliant. I've told you this since I met you that day on the phone. You're brilliant. And the thing is that
Thank you.
you did just show us basically what neurodivergency and the way of processing. It's brilliant. It's brilliant, but it just is different than other
Different.
people's.
Yeah.
It's just different. I want to ask you a question about you mentioned something about William Burroughs. And by
Yes.
the way, I want to ask you, so does he figure large in your, and I have about 15 minutes
Yeah.
until the
Sure.
next Zoom. And this is
Wow.
fantastic.
This went so
Fantastic. This is
quickly.
exactly
Yeah.
what I wanted to get to is you. You see, you
Okay.
talk about everybody else, but I want to talk about you.
Cool.
So, so your heroes or the people who you have kind of
Yeah.
like touchstones.
Yeah. Touchdowns. Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked. So William S. Burroughs, somebody I share with. Okay, I'm going to talk about some other people because I need to talk about Billy Martin, aka Poppy Z. Bright. We're contemporaries. We're peers. Um, he's actually a year younger than I am, and but the thing is that one of the things we bonded over in back in the 90s was William S. Burroughs as well as Bauhaus, Bauhaus, the band Bauhaus. Um, what is critical for people to understand about Burroughs, just on a very, very superficial level, okay, there'd be two things that people would know about Burroughs. He was addicted to heroin, and he wrote a famous novel called Naked Lunch. Well, actually, that's two things, right? About being a heroin addict. He wrote, and he was homosexual, actually bisexual, and as well as he shot his wife in a bizarre drunken accident and killed her. Um, and that's it. So people don't that is extremely sensationalistic kind of some bullshit. I mean, all those things happened. I mean, he was a junkie, but he was to being a junkie, like there were millions of junkies, you know. Junk does heroin, opioids specifically. does horrible things to your brain. It's one of the reasons why it's the worst drug imaginable. And now we have fentanyl, which is insanely addictive and can kill you in very, very small quantities, which is what happened to my dear friend Jordan Gallagher. Rest in peace. The um, what people need to understand is that in America, we don't we have this anti-intellectual tradition, which, like, considering that we're the land of Whitman and Melville and these homegrown heroes, Emerson, right, Thoreau, um, who inspired. I mean, Emerson inspired Nietzsche. And so, but there's an anti-intellectualism that's been fostered in the United States since the early days, and that's intertwined with Puritanism and the kind of very, very shallow and limited understanding of spirituality and how that, you know, intersects with religious practices and rituals and beliefs and so forth. We don't really get. Okay, so going back to my first response to your first question that you asked, it's all about rebellion, rebellion against the received information. Um, Burroughs was famous for, and there's a video that when you're making this movie, that I think would be great to intersperse with while I'm talking, and you would show this video. Okay, it's by the band Ministry, and it's called um, "Just One Fix," "Just One Fix," and this Ministry was one of the original industrial bands, and industrial music was basically created by a guy named was a transgender person named Genesis P. Orridge. Genesis P. Orridge worked with Burroughs in about 1975. Um, had access to Burroughs' original cut up tapes because he did cut up tapes as well as doing cut up text. He considered reality to be a cut up, right? And I think that we're living in the reality that was envisioned and partially shaped by William S. Burroughs. So the thing is that in Europe, they considered him to be a, one of the major thinkers of pretty much of all time, certainly of modernity. And Sylvain L'Étranger, I believe, did a sort of a summit meeting of Europe's, top philosophers. You had, Deleuze and Guattari and Michel Foucault, and they all converged on on this celebration of the life of I mean the work of William S. Burroughs. And Michel Foucault insisted on introducing Burroughs. And so, Foucault ascribed a lot of his thoughts on power to Burroughs, right? Anyway, in this video, Burroughs has a shotgun and he's shooting at pictures of he's shooting at um, these whatever their signs that say control, history, and so forth. And sort of like you're shooting at clay pigeons, right? Only you know, he's shooting at what we think of as consensual reality. Now that's very, very frightening to people. But again, going back to what Ma Yongbo said about me, it's all about rebellion. It's rebellion against the given, right? The given is that you're this embodied being, you're gonna die, and that's it, right? And you get to have an orgasm, you get to eat candy, big fucking deal, right? Rebellion is saying taking a shotgun and you know very deliberately the title of my chapbook, which I did in 2014, was called Akashic Shotgun. It's very deliberately taking aim at this control of ourselves you know, um, Burroughs' concept, which he expressed most in a very, very interesting way, particularly in sort of science fiction genre, which is counterintuitive in books like Nova Express, was the idea that we've been hijacked, that our entire identity has been hijacked by this notion that we're located in this, in time and space, and that's it. We have sort of what he called the XY coordinates, of flesh. And his whole work, I guess, his whole that he devoted his entire life to, and he sort of bequeathed this to others, Genesis, was his whole project was, how do we how do we fight control? How do we rebel against the given? So that is when I first discovered William S. Burroughs at the age of 13. When I was looking for, I'd read through all the entire children's section of my local library, and I was like, what's next? Oh, well, I really liked Edgar Rice Burroughs because of Tarzan, right? And so I was like, huh. So, oh, there's Edgar Rice Burroughs books in the adult section. Wow, this must be like really, really, I couldn't imagine how cool those were. And then I'm looking through, and then see, oh, is this a Burroughs? There's another Burroughs, and it's the Grove Press edition where it has the cover was by Salvador Dali. I was like, oh my gosh, it's Salvador Dali. So this has to be good, right? I'm looking through it, and my brain has never been the same. I mean, if you thought I was neurodivergent then, I'm reading this thing and I'm 13 years old and I'm like, my gosh. Um, another huge inspiration for me, speaking of the Beat Generation, as we were, and we have 7 minutes, is Allen Ginsberg. Okay, so my father, Stephen M. Johnson, he was a contributor, you know, like he was a multiple contributor. Basically, every issue of the Whole Earth Review, which had different names, like the Coevolution Quarterly, it came out of the Whole Earth catalog, right? And he was just one of their staff contributors. And so they had the whole in 1980, they had the Whole Earth Festival in Sausalito. And you remember in the movie Lost in Translation with Bill um
Murray.
Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson, right? Where he has that fling with the this woman who has this band called We're Sausalito, and obviously mocking that whole kind of like, hippie vibe that they have. And we get out there, and it's the what was it, the fairgrounds or whatever, and it was very scorching hot, as I remember. And and he says, okay, so you gotta now keep in mind that I that Ginsburg had actually visited Yale, you know, and when my dad was attending, and he he'd already, I think he'd been kicked out of Columbia, and for writing obscene words in the dust of his window, right, and his dorm in Columbia, and which he talks about in Howl. And so my dad studied with Bloom, and so talking about revolt again. This was the guy, he was so intransigent. His father was a very, very famous poet too, as well. Ginsberg's father was, I believe his name was Louis Ginsberg, if I'm not mistaken, an academic poet. Um, Ginsberg was terrified of what was bubbling up inside of him when he came up with what became Howl. Anyway, so this was the debut of the of his reading of a poem called Plutonian Ode. And Plutonian Ode is about, obviously it's about, the core ingredient of nuclear weapons. And it's a very, very archetypal, very thrilling poem, which where you can actually feel the sort of like, is using what are called like dithyrambs. Dithyrambs is sort of this kind of propulsive um, meter which comes from the ancient Greek, you know, the Odyssey, Homer, the epic poems where you have this sort of da-dum, 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 that, and he used the same method in Howl, that boom de boom de boom, that's something something something, and you almost, I mean, you got a chill, listening to this guy because it was much more than just some guy reading a poem like at a coffee shop. This was sort of like, bards were used like when you went to war, and particularly in my, Celtic heritage, where, you would, before you were preparing for battle, right? You'd have the bard get up and speak, and like, this was like the bardic voice, like Blake says, hear the voice of the bard who past, present, and future sees, whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees, right? Blake was a huge, huge influence on Ginsberg, as was William Walt Whitman. But so yeah, I would say that Ginsberg, Burroughs, Kerouac to a lesser extent, but certainly my dad's friend Alan Tempko, who was an architectural critic that my dad studied with at UC Berkeley, um, and he's a character in the original On the Road. And I would say, and all the other people that were inspired by the original beats, including well, my friend Mark Olmsted, who's in a lot of, I've been, who was like a basically Ginsberg said that Olmsted was going to be sort of the new him, and that he sort of combined the, Burroughsian vision with, the sort of, Ginsberg poetics. And it's just an incredible opportunity that people don't take to really revolt against society, and revolt against the given, right? You only get, you know, 5 minutes really, and we're almost out of time, but we have a minute to go. You only get like 5 minutes. Your entire life is basically 5 minutes, and people waste it with bullshit. And I would say revolt. I can't hear you.
I'm getting some notification. I got to tell you something. This is
Yeah.
exactly what I was hoping this would be.
Yeah.
This is incredible. This is about you. This is about all this stuff.
Yeah.
And this is great. I mean, absolutely wonderful. So I know exactly where we're going to pick up next
Okay.
time.
Great.
You're the
I'll,
best.
yeah.
You're the best.
You're the best. No, you're the best.
I am very impressed. I'm very impressed. This
Thank
is
you.
great. This is great. I have a lot of notes.
Yeah.
Can you send me the AI or the transcript or whatever,
I'll
please?
send you. Yeah. I'll
Wonderful.
send you the AI
Okay.
transcript thing, and I'll
And we'll
send you
and
the
we'll
link.
and I have to for a film, I actually have to transcribe it word for word, but
Yeah.
this is the synopsis. But
Yeah.
also I just am trying to get those emails for you. I'll send them to you and I'll be
Great.
back in touch in a couple days, okay?
And okay, if you could get a hold of Tony Martin and Bev Bevan from Black Sabbath, please,
Okay.
because
Did you send me that?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Can you send it to me again? Do you mind?
Oh,
Okay.
not at all. Yeah.
Send it to me again. And listen, have a fabulous day.
You too, Vanessa. Take
Thank you,
care.
thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Best.